Limnot Yameinu, Limnot Yameinu, Limnot Yameinu, Kein Hoda, Venavi Levav Chochmah. Teach us to treasure each day. Teach us to treasure each day, that we may open our hearts to your wisdom. Oh, teach us to treasure each day. Treasure each day. Teach us to treasure each day. Limnot Yameinu, Kein Hoda, Venavi Levav Chochmah.
We welcome you here to this sacred space, made even more sacred today by each one of you coming to honor Bobby, coming to honor each mourner. We also invite you, God, Holy One of Blessing, to this space to be in mourning with us. And though there are many friends and family here on the live stream as well, we are sending our condolences, our thoughts, our love to those of you in those first two rows. Ginny, to you, for having built a life and for having raised with Bobby worlds. To Jared and Julia, Scott and Brittany, to Brent and Sasha, Alexandra and David, to David and Myra and Danny. There's no end to your pain. And know that today is just the beginning of the remembering. We also send deep condolences to the crown, the jewels, the grandchildren, to Jax and Ellie and Banks and Samantha, Allison, Charlotte, Naomi, and finally to the boy chick, to Jordan, to Noah, to Eli, and to Benjamin. We remember an honorable, incredibly productive life. We remember Bobby's life, deep intellect and deep emotional intelligence, an incredible human being. And we now look to our tradition for words of comfort. Many of you know the words to Psalm 23, so please join with me first in English, and then you're welcome to join with me in Hebrew. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. You're welcome to join with me in selections. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai roi lo etza. Yinot asher bitzeni. Ame menuchot yanaleni. Nafshi yeshovel. Nafshi yeshovel. Yan chayni b'matle tzedek. Leman shemo. Ach tov v'chesed. Yirtzefuni kol yemei chayai. Shavti beveit Adonai. Shavti beveit Adonai. Yored Yamim.
Tzror b'tzror hachayim et nishmato. The word tzror means something like to weave or to knot. And so I translate that phrase, which occurs at the end of the memorial prayer, to say, may his soul be woven into the fabric of our lives. There are, I think, at least 9 people. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 1 violinist to help us begin the task of weaving what Bobby Willig taught us. I'm going to ask for them to come down here and sit in the batter's box now, so that when the time comes, they're not going to trample on people's feet trying to get out of their seats. Ah, good. They're all here. Great. And you're right there. That's fine. That's fine. I'm going to ask you, all of you, to join me in beginning this process of weaving this celebration of an extraordinary life with a moment of silence. Think about him. Think about who he was. Think about what he taught you. Think about the funny things that he did, the extraordinary things that he did that occasionally blew you away. Remember him. Let's take a minute. poem by the Israeli poet who called herself Zelda. Each of us has a name given by God and given by our parents. Each of us has a name given by our stature and our smile, and given by what we wear. Each of us has a name given by the mountains and given by our walls. Each of us has a name given by the stars and given by our neighbors. Each of us has a name given by our sins and given by our yearning. Each of us has a name given by our enemies and given by our love. Each of us has a name given by our celebrations and given by our work. Each of us has a name given by the seasons and given by our blindness. Each of us has a name given by the sea and given by our death. I ask you to help us continue giving Bobby Willig his name. I hope I have the order right. Mr. Paul Helman, Bobby's cousin.
Bobby and I grew up in the same two Brooklyn homes. Bobby would often find delight in telling me that his earliest memory of me at about 2 years old was chewing and slobbering all over his baseball mitt. Maybe not my earliest memory, but my most indelible memory of him is Hippie Bobby, whose frequent visits from the university to our home so enriched and enlivened my youth. We all know of Bobby's brilliance nonpareil, his mathematical prowess, and his lightning mind. But what made Bobby a truly great and singular human was the pairing of such an intellect with an equally massive amount of empathy, caring, and goodness. Bobby's greatness is in his completeness. With Bobby's passing, I'm the last of the amazing family that lived on East 45th and 21st and L. Sometimes that makes me very sad and lonely. But that family, with Bobby at the forefront, taught me how to love, how to be loved, how to live free, and how to be in control of my destiny. Thank you, Bobby. And in my own family, I find infinite joy, even through all the sadness that often is life's. And I know, in large part, because you were all touched by Bobby, that you too will find such joy through your lives. Thank you, Bobby. May we find joy today in the peace and the celebration of the life of this great man that we know as Bobby.
David and Danny Siegel, Bobby's nephews. I don't know who goes first. David.
The year was 1978. Paula, our mother, Bobby's sister, had passed away at the untimely age of 36. Shortly thereafter, our dad became desperately ill, leaving my brother Danny and I to fend for ourselves as young teenagers in Israel. Danny, in particular, faced an extremely difficult situation at home while I was serving in the Israeli army. At the same time, Bobby and Ginny were in their early 30s, launching their careers and raising a young family with Jared and newborn Scott. Who in their right mind would even fathom intervening for us under such circumstances? Well, Bobby and Ginny did just that. They raced to Israel to gather evidence, fought for months to gain custody over Danny, and took me in a year later after my military service. They effectively adopted not one, but both of us, doubling their household overnight. Danny and I had lost our immediate family, but from that moment on, we have never been alone. As I reflect on our lives together after all these years, I realized that Bobby and Ginny had been our surrogate parents for longer than our mother was alive. Our first few weeks together were a little bit challenging. While I left a cigarette burn in Bobby's brand new car, which of course he delighted in reminding me of for decades, Bobby had to go find Danny in Pennsylvania after Danny got lost on a walk to the local Quaker Bridge Mall. Bobby gave of himself to everyone around him. His late night advice sessions were truly life-changing, sacred moments. When we needed guidance, there was Bobby, clad in his faded polo shirt, Diet Coke in hand, no earlier than midnight, because that's when he would hold court. Each of us had his full and undivided attention, even with looming deadlines on pressing cases. He made us feel like we were the center of his universe, and he was always fully present. Myra and I will never forget the pride we felt when he carried on that tradition with our own kids. No, I lie in bed. There's so much more to say, but there are never enough words nor enough time. Bobby's boundless love for Ginny, for Jared, for Scott, Brent, Alex, their spouses and children was larger than life. And as for us, Bobby will always be our North Star, our compass, and we will carry his legacy forward. Anyone visiting Fourth Lake would surely have seen the light in Bobby's office tower, shining brightly at all hours of the night, especially from the Hill House. That light was a beacon for us all. It was something that we took comfort in, and yes, we took for granted, assuming that it would burn for many years to come. Bobby's presence will continue to shine brightly in our lives and in our hearts. His light will never be extinguished. Yehi zichro baruch, may his memory forever be a blessing.
I guess I'm not going to improvise. Bobby was so much more than just an uncle to me. My existence here right now is living proof of his incredible generosity, kindness, and love. Bobby, Ginny, and his parents, Meg and Jack, all intervened on my behalf and brought me into their home when I was 16 years old, heroically rescuing me from a traumatic and painful childhood in Israel. Bobby was a shocking juxtaposition to my earlier life, a joyful, full of life mentor, and the perfect combination of an authority figure and a friend. He effortlessly became a model of what love, kindness, and humor looks like. He got me, he understood me. We both shared a childlike playfulness and a humorous outlook that transcended language and logic. I had a unique spiritual bond with Bobby that validated and lifted me every time it happened. I was Bobby and Jenny's first effort of raising an adolescent, and I wasn't an easy one. Bobby gently and lovingly cared for me, allowing me to be who I was without judgment, and guided me to rise above the limitations of who I was at the time. My one-on-one time with him was crucial and unforgettable. Our conversations elevated the parameters of thought and language and were punctuated with unlimited punchlines. Getting him to like and appreciate something I cared about was my ultimate validation and joy in my life. I always knew the light was on at his office. Late at night, I often caught him watching some video of my antics on stage. He was the biggest champion of any of my artistic accomplishments. Bobby was everything: a friend, a mentor, a role model, a parent, and the biggest example of what unconditional love that one could possibly know. He will always be with us, always.
Five friends. Paul Taylor.
At the base of Table Mountain in Cape Town, South Africa, sits one of the world's most gorgeous botanical gardens. It has beautiful, diverse flowers, birds of paradise, king protea, sugar bush, renowned all over the world. The man who created this garden was named Henry Pearson, and he is buried in the garden. There is no great statue of him. The plaque is small. It sits amidst a gorgeous collection of colorful flowers. And the epitaph says, "If you seek his monument, look around you." Fellow mourners, if you seek Bobby's monument, look around you. We are the garden that Bobby created. We are the extended family that Bobby and Ginny braided together from all walks of their incredibly rich half a century of marriage. His colleagues, his students, their friends from Princeton, their friends from our magical summer community in upstate New York, and of course, their children. If you think about the arc of Bobby's life, it was not inevitable, perhaps you could even say it was not even likely, that he would create a life so profoundly devoted to family. My window on the young Bobby comes from my wife, Stephanie. Many of you here know that before there was a Bobby and Ginny, and before there was a Stephanie and Paul, there was a Stephanie and Bobby. This was in his hippie years in the late 60s. And Stephanie remembers Bobby as charming, charismatic, cocky. Pretty sure he was the smartest guy, not just in the room, but in the planet. And one of her fondest memories, the story she loves to tell, is when 19-year-old Stephanie told her 21-year-old boyfriend, Bobby, you're very smart. You're very smart, but you're not smart about everything. There are certain things you're not really that smart about. She said it in a teasing, ego-puncturing way. I'm familiar with that. And Bobby didn't take it well, as Stephanie tells the story. He kind of came back, what are you talking about? Well, maybe people skills, maybe other things. It's just not all about you. Anyway, she was visiting Bobby out at Stanford at the time, and over the 3 or 4 days, he kept on coming back. What do you mean I'm not smart about this? What do you mean I'm not smart about that? Well, Bobby and Stephanie didn't last. This was wonderful news to Stephanie's parents who thought Bobby was bad news. It was even better news to Bobby's parents who thought Stephanie was bad news. And it was very good news for Ginny and me. But if you think about who that young man was, that his self-identity was all about how smart he was. That is, on the face of it, not the optimal foundation to lead the life he led, so devoted to family and so devoted to others. So how did he get from there to here? I don't know all the answers, but I'll make two offerings. One of them is sitting right there, Ginny. Ginny has sort of made her life's work wrangling Bobby, domesticating Bobby, and smoothing out some of Bobby's sharp edges. She never got them all. If you had the bad fortune to be a waiter who got the order wrong, or a sommelier who didn't pair the wines the right way, or God forbid, an economist who tried to pull a fast one by taking some data, plucking them out of context, Bobby could cut you down to size with a withering glance and with a mordant and caustic laughter. So that was Bobby, but that was not the biggest part of Bobby. The biggest part of Bobby is what you already heard about. There was a largeness of heart about Bobby. There was a generosity of spirit about Bobby. And what we haven't talked about, but I think is part of the key to this whole thing, there was a little boy about Bobby. How many grown men call themselves Bobby? My favorite current window into Bobby is the office in his Princeton home above the garage, that modest little office above the garage. It has a wall of the kind that one would expect from someone who has had the kind of distinguished career that Bobby has had. It has the diplomas. It has the photographs with presidents and cabinet secretaries. It has the mementos from cases won and all the rest. But I'm pretty sure that the favorite wall hanging in that office is the headline from the Harvard Crimson that says, "Pinball fans aghast as Willig gets 2785." A record apparently that holds to this day. Why do I think that's his favorite wall hanging? Because in that same office, across the way, there is a giant poster of a pinball machine. And then on the other wall, there is a giant actual pinball machine. And next to that giant pinball machine is a giant giraffe. And it is one of maybe a dozen giraffes in that very room, and probably 4 or 5 scores of giraffes all over the house. You create that office that way, and you're sending a message to yourself, to your kids, to everybody who visits, which is take your work seriously, but don't take yourself too seriously. If you take a tour of the rest of the Willig, the Mason Willig home, there are other messages they can say. As many of you know, they are wonderful collectors of art. There's hardly a square inch of that house that doesn't have art on it. But the square inches that don't have art have family photographs. We all have family photographs in our homes. I've never been in a home that has as many family photographs as Bobby and Ginny's home. They are every hallway, up the stairs, down the stairs, into their bedroom, on every surface, every album. That's the message that this is what we value. This is what's important. Stephanie and I know that house very well. We have been overnight guests in that house, I'm guessing hundreds and hundreds of nights. we have an undeclared contest with the Shimshonis as to which of us had been more the beneficiaries of Bobby and Ginny's hospitality at their many houses. We had them beat until the first year of the pandemic. They kind of cheated. They squatted up in upstate New York, and they took us out on that. I believe it's not just the house we know well. It's the family we know well. I think I've slept in every one of those kids' bedrooms, not when they were there, but and I've watched them from the beginning, and I've watched the whole journey with them. The day before Bobby died, the whole family had gathered for what was in effect a deathbed vigil. And Ginny called. We were on touch with Ginny many times a day. She asked Stephanie to get on the phone so Stephanie could say her last words. Bobby, and I listened in on the conversation, and it was a tearful one. And she recalled that yes, their childhood romance, it didn't work out, but you know what, it was probably for the best, because what Ginny, what Stephanie got out of it, what Bobby and Ginny and I got out of it was really two families. That's how close we have been over the years, and lifelong friendships. And maybe I think Stephanie, like Bobby, know maybe she was wrong 50 some years ago. Maybe Bobby actually did have a lot of people skills and emotional intelligence after all. So where does that leave us? Those children, to me, are like the flowers of Kirschenbach's, that gorgeous botanical garden. Each of them is different. Each of them is exquisite. They all have beautiful minds, and more important, they all have beautiful hearts. They are Bobby and Ginny's greatest creation. And because of them, Bobby may be gone, but he is still here.
Yoni Shimshoni.
Ginny asked that we limit ourselves to 3 minutes. And I had always thought that when somebody says Ginny asks, that doesn't really mean asks. And though Bobby always urged me to have an elevator speech ready, I find it, of course, impossible to summarize or capture what Bobby means to me and for us in his life and in his death, even in 30 minutes or 3 hours or 3 days. There's just no way to collapse this. And I say us and not I, for while I'm up here, it is our families. It's our two families who have been so intertwined for 50 years in a fabric of bonds made only stronger with time and despite distance. So how can it be done anyway? Somehow to compress it. As I've looked around and listened to the gushing and persistent outpouring of love, admiration, and gratitude over the past several months and weeks, it occurs to me that actually words may be unnecessary. This is the ultimate testament in summary. And Bobby, if you could look around the sanctuary right now, you'd be flabbergasted. And you'd have to agree that the proof is simple and the evidence is straightforward. It is the revealed preference of so many people and a community. But if pushed to summarize succinctly a little bit of this, as Hillel reduced the entire Bible to the principle of what is hateful to you, do not do to others, I might encapsulate our feelings or my feelings as follows. Your death diminishes us all and makes us smaller. But your life overwhelmingly enhanced us and continues to enhance us. And you have made us bigger and better people. Bobby, perhaps your most important legacy was your basic approach to life, where you were in a league of your own. The future was always there for you to mold and not accept. And I'd say you manhandled life or rode herd with infinite energy, humor, dedication, love, generosity, and ridiculous levels of talent. Indeed, you pushed the envelope and set standards in so many areas and on so many dimensions, it makes one's head spin. Of these, perhaps the greatest achievements were actually not on the professional or intellectual level, but they were on the personal dimensions, as an infallible friend, and most outstandingly, as the patriarch of the most amazing family that together with Ginny, you set in motion, nourished, and helped navigate. And so actually, if we apply the accomplishment index, economists have this accomplishment index, and if we apply it to your life, in normal human terms, you basically lived some 3 lifespans or maybe more. But one wasn't enough. And we should always remember that forever. Now we've been talking and thinking as though your journey is complete and that we're here to say goodbye and to mourn your journey's end as we continue on ours. I think this is a misconception and it's the wrong way to think about it. First, yours has not ended. For the memories, advice, values, approaches, roadmaps you have endowed us with will continue to guide us. And I, for one, intend to continue our conversations and consultations as I go forward in my life. Second, our own current journeys on earth are not forever. We're all on our way, and at some point, each of us, in turn, will join you on that road. As Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai wrote, life is called life as the west wind is called west, though it blows towards the east. The way death is called death, though it blows towards life. And every person is a dam between past and future. When he dies, the dam bursts. The past breaks into the future, and there is no before or after. All time becomes one time. So, dear Bobby, this is not goodbye. This is rather, as we say in Israel, lehitraot, au revoir, will we sing.
Lori Ordover.
My husband, Yoni Ordover, and I have a deep, rich history with the Mason Willig family. Yanish passed away almost exactly a year ago. He and Bobby were dear friends, closer than brothers, and professional partners. After Yanish passed, I found some recent exchanges between Bobby and Yanish, where they compared cancer treatments, body sizes, lack of social life, and generally commiserated together in a way that was so 100% them. Bobby says, "It seems that I'm in worse shape than you, always competing." Yanish replies, "I have never competed against you. It would have been a lost cause. I looked up to you for wisdom and courage, but competition, never. My hope is that over time, things will look better than now. You fought many battles, and vanquished so many enemies. This will be another one in the long list. Please keep me informed as much as you feel up to. I cannot do much, but will diligently do what I can. I love you, Jay. Their deep history and rich love for one another went back to 1975. They met at a conference, and I quote Bobby's eulogy because he said it best. Janusz and I met and began our commingling of mind and spirit while employing 2 adjacent urinals during an IO conference at Bell Labs in 1975. Our streams of complaints about the boring papers were as every bit as synchronous as our liquid ones. And we knew we found great partners for whatever would come next. They went on to become the greatest of friends and colleagues, inspiring both incredible work and love. In fact, it was Ginny, with Bobby's support, who introduced me to Janusz, who became the love of my life. As Bobby said, we loved Janusz in every way and every mode, and were telepathically intimate. I met Bobby and Ginny when we had our sons in Princeton Jewish Center Nursery School. I don't want to brag about how long ago that was, but those babies are now grown men, and our lives have forever stayed commingled. Through some of my own personal and professional hurdles, Bobby stayed by my side and took an active role in changing my life for the better. Bobby, rest in peace and have fun working on equations with Janusz in heaven, while all the while Janusz peruses the wine list. Loving kisses.
Jon Orszag.
Robert Daniel Willig was a giant in the world of industrial organization, but he was known by a one-word nickname, Bobby. He was the Tiger, Beyonce, Bono of antitrust economics, a legend for how smart he was, how quick his brain worked, his bat-like sleep patterns, and for the number of people like me whose lives he changed. His contributions to the antitrust space were remarkable. There is not an economic issue over the past 5 decades that Bobby didn't help shape. But perhaps his most significant contributions to the antitrust world were the 1992 merger guidelines. It was Bobby's influence that put economics squarely in the center of merger matters. And our economy is so much better off as a result. And you've already heard this. It's impossible to talk about Bobby without talking about his legendary brain. It was like a supercomputer working at the fastest clock speeds, processing amazing amounts of information, always ahead of whomever he was talking to. And he knew that too. And he was different from economists in other ways. You know, some would say that economists are often dry or sometimes even boring, but not Bobby. Most work during daylight hours, but not Bobby. He worked when everyone else slept, and he slept when everyone else worked. He had a love for writing these eloquent poems for special occasions. And he loved to laugh, especially with his dear friend Janusz. And unlike many economists, Bobby loved to teach. He loved to teach anyone and everyone. And as a result, he inspired so many students, lawyers, judges, and others to have a passion for economics. Now, Bobby's impact on our firm and me personally are beyond description. It was his idea to actually name our firm Competition Policy Associates, or COMPAS for short. And I remember the moment he called, I believe Alex was in the room. His voice filled with so much pride that he had nailed it. And then it was his long-term relationship with John Click that helped bring COMPAS together with FTI, and then to help create the firm that we now have, COMPAS Lexicon. Now, I first met Bobby 35 years ago. I was probably a baby at the time. It was somewhat a few years later when I wanted to take a year off from Princeton to work in government that Bobby convinced my parents that that was a good idea. And when I wanted to stay in Washington to work at the White House, it was Bobby who convinced Princeton to give me credit for that. In fact, he served as my field study advisor. Now, a few years later, we ended up working on a consulting project together, and that started our truly special relationship. He took it under his responsibility to take me under his wing. And from that point forward, Ginny considered me, I think, to be Bobby's second wife. Bobby and I spoke almost every single day, oftentimes for hours, usually late at night, because that was when he did his best thinking. Now, this hasn't come up yet, but Bobby in his everyday life was always an economist. He has, I believe, the record for the most parking tickets in the history of Princeton. Why? It was his view that the cost of his time spent walking to the parking lot that had been assigned to him was greater than just parking right in front of the Woodrow Wilson School every single day and getting the expected parking ticket or two or three. So every month he packaged up the tickets and he sent in an invoice effectively for his parking expenses. So he definitely lived the life that he had taught to his students about rationality. So now the torch has been passed, and his many, many disciples, many of whom are here today, have a special responsibility to carry on his legacy. And my promise to him and to Ginny, Jared, Scott, Brent, and Alex is that I will do everything I can to make that happen. And let me conclude by saying that the loss of such close friends, Bobby and Janusz, in such a short period of time is crushing. I miss them dearly. I miss their advice. I miss their mentorship. I miss being the young one. And I miss my daily calls with them. In the past year, I've wanted to call Bobby to just tell him about something that happened in a case or to get his advice. There are not many phone numbers I know by heart, but I know his. And there's nothing I wouldn't do to pick up the phone today and call 609-921-3457 to have one last call, one more piece of advice. There is some comfort knowing that my friends Janusz and Bobby are together again. I'm sure they're drinking a glass of wine. Janusz picked it. Chit-chatting about economic theory or some case or some person or some new paper. And they're certainly chuckling about the story of how they first met. And we are all better for that time we had with them. I'll miss you, Bobby.
Ed Stier.
I have it written down. I have never been able to extemporize a eulogy, but before I read what I have on paper, I'd like to make an observation. What you've heard today from these wonderful people is a giant portrait of Bobby. a mural painted on what started out to be a blank wall. And it's very, very beautiful. And I feel like I'm about to put a couple of brush strokes of my own on it. I hope it remains beautiful. In searching for the source of my deep love and admiration for Bobby, I stumbled across a simple quote from the Dalai Lama. Share your knowledge. It is a way to achieve immortality. Those words brought to mind an experience I had with Bobby many years ago. Judy and I had traveled to Paris with Ginny and Bobby, where he was to give a lecture to the governmental leaders of France on reform of their rail system. The evening before, we had dined far outside of Paris, and in driving back to our hotel, I became hopelessly lost. Being too macho to ask for directions, I delivered Bobby and Ginny to our hotel in the wee hours of the morning, depriving him of needed sleep before his early morning lecture. When he returned to the hotel after speaking, I casually asked him how it went. Bobby made it clear that because I had kept him up so late, he had not been able to connect sufficiently with his audience to convince them of the elegant wisdom of his reform recommendations. And as a result, the railroads of France were doomed to inefficiency. You have set back the railroad system of France by at least 10 years, he told me in a lightly sarcastic tone that masked his deep frustration. I start with this vignette because the experience opened my eyes to Bobby's deep passion for teaching. He was consumed with conveying to his listeners the knowledge he had derived from his research, experience, and creativity. And I hadn't previously realized how much it meant to him. As I observed him over the years after my Paris debacle, I came to believe that teaching was the very essence of Bobby's life. In Bobby's hands, teaching was an art form. I never attended one of his classes, yet I experienced his range of skills in commanding attention, drawing me into conversation, listening carefully, challenging me, breaking down the subject matter into comprehensible pieces, and assuring that I came away with a higher level of understanding. He was never pedantic, and I was rarely conscious of being taught. But I always knew that he was generously sharing the products of his towering intellect, ideas that otherwise would have been inaccessible to me. The subjects he taught me ranged from politics to baseball, poker to ethics, wine to philosophy. Of course, we talked in depth about the cases in which he participated as an expert, describing his battle of wits in depositions and trials as though he were a matador, deftly frustrating his opponent until it was time to go in for the kill. I'm sure that I'm describing experiences that resonate with all of you. Many of us have observed Bobby lovingly teaching his children and his grandchildren. And whether or not we were bridge players, all of us received lessons in the game he so loved, as Ginny can attest. It is our nature to want to immortalize those we love when they have passed. The Great Pyramids, the concept of heaven, and belief in reincarnation are attempts to reject the finality of death. But for us, Bobby will remain a part of our lives as long as we remember the lessons he patiently taught us. And we will tell generations to come about this truly remarkable friend, husband, father, grandfather, and teacher.
Bobby's daughter-in-law, Julia Benedict.
Amongst all you've heard today, Bobby considered his greatest accomplishment to be the product of his collaboration with Ginny. I don't mean their Bronze Life master status from the American Bridge League. Together, Bobby and Ginny created 4 children and raised 2 nephews who collectively produced 11 more children, all of whom received Bobby's powerful wisdom, guidance, genetics, and absolute unconditional love and support. Bobby loved his children more than anything else by an exponential magnitude, and nothing gave him the unbridled joy and warmth like his grandchildren. The beaming smile on his face while helping Samantha with math, or watching Jax finish a shape puzzle, or cuddling baby Naomi was unmatched. Bobby was in his purest element in those moments. Bobby was the ultimate professor, certainly to thousands of students over 4 decades at Princeton University, but also to his friends, his colleagues, and anyone who enjoyed even a bit of his time, but most of all to his family. He taught them so much, and not by telling, but by showing. Lessons about hard work and family first, and unconditional love, and idealism and cynicism, and the power of sincerity and emotion, and combining logic with passion, and combining spirituality with practicality, and having confidence in expertise, and balancing obnoxiousness with charm, and the importance of precision and utility analysis in everyday decision-making, and finding humor everywhere, and enjoying the freedom of being naked. Bobby taught by example. Jared, Scott, Brent, and Alexandra, and nephews David, Danny, Brian, and Garrett, and all the next generation too, have been infused with Bobby since birth and guided by him ever since. So much good in who they are and the choices they've made is because of him. And the significant others, Brittany, Sasha, David, Myra, and I, have been recipients of the same gifts from Bobby since the first hint we would be joining this special family. He innately guides us all the time. He influences us. He challenges us. He makes us better, all from within. Jared has told me that when he makes everyday choices or giant decisions or anything in between, he instinctively asks himself first, what would Bobby do? And then applies his own perspective to that core. He's done that since he was a kid, and when Bobby got sick, Jared finally told him. He wrote Bobby this letter. Dear Dad, I have a wonderful life that I am ever grateful for, and much of it is thanks to you. You've given me endless gifts, of course, material and experiential, plus genetic too. But most impactful has been what you may not have even realized you've given me. A North Star to look up to, emulate, and aspire to be. I could never properly express my gratitude. I love you, Dad. But we did get to repay him just a little bit. Here's the little known story in Jared's words. When Julia and I had our first child, my dad visited us in the hospital, and I pulled him into the next room to ask his permission to name her for his father, whom we loved so much. But I started crying before I could even get the words out. My dad bear hugged me, and I was able to take a deep breath and ask for his blessing to name our little girl Jax, for his father, Jack. My dad immediately started crying too, and nodding his head yes, because he couldn't speak either. Then I said to him what I have been rehearsing in my head for my entire life. Grandpa meant so much to all of us. And I know how important he was to you. I know exactly how you feel about him. Because it's how I feel about you. The only words my dad could get out in response were, "It's too much." And we held each other with tears streaming down for what felt like a wonderful forever. By paying tribute to his father with our firstborn, I was finally able to do something to thank my own dad. All of Bobby and Ginny's children are a unique version of their dad, of course, with some fabulous Mason genes mixed in. It makes them each truly special, and it's not hard to tell they are incredibly proud and appreciative. That will never end. And so Bobby lives on for the rest of our days. He is not gone. We all vowed to Bobby in his final weeks to live our lives as he did. And if we can do that, we will be passing his innate teachings down to our kids, who will pass them to their kids, and so on. And no doubt all those in this room and beyond who have intersected with the mighty Bobby Willig over the last 75 years will also continue to be impacted profoundly by his lessons. And so, just like the North Star in our sky, he will live on for generations. He is in all of us. Professor, Bobby, Dad, we love you immensely. We are forever grateful for you. You are a blessing.
To bring this first formal session of weaving to a pause, we ask Elizabeth Pitcairn to play for us. You gonna play the Kaddish? She's gonna play a setting of the Kaddish by Maurice Ravel.
Please rise for the recitation of the memorial prayer, where we ask the Holy One of Blessing to take care of Bobby's neshama, his soul.
El Malei Rachamim Shochein Bameromim Hamatzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanafeicha Shechina במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת ראובן דניאל בן יעקב ומגינה שהלך לעולמו בגן עדן תהי מנוחתו אנא בעל הרחמים הסירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור החיים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר אמן.
El Maleh Rachamim, exalted, compassionate one, grant infinite rest under the wings of your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, with his parents, to the soul of Bobby Willig, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful God, we ask that you remember all of his worthy, righteous, and loving deeds. May Bobby's soul be bound up in the bonds of everlasting life. May you, God, bring his family and friends comfort. May Bobby rest in peace. As we all say together, Amen. Amen. Please be seated for just a few more moments. We know that each one of you has so many stories to share with the family. We invite you to write them down and send them in written hands or by email to the family so they can read your remembrances. We invite you to come to Shiva and to share with them. We want to ask you, due to some timing issues in Princeton Cemetery, to allow the family and the clergy to leave the parking lot before everyone else does, so they can go to the private burial. All who are here today, all friends and family, are invited to go back to Ginny and Bobby's home now, and or for the remainder of the day. The family will join you immediately after the burial. There'll be a service, a minyan, this evening, tonight at 7 p.m. There'll be a service tomorrow night at 7 p.m. And public Shiva begins in the morning at 10 a.m. This concludes the chapel part of our service, and we ask that all pallbearers please come forward.